Hello strategy gaming enthusiasts, my name is AlzaboHD. In today's challenge video, we will recreate history by marrying the Habsburg Dynasty with the Habsburg Dynasty. In this epic quest for the cousin Chin, we will join brother husbands with sister wives and attempt to break our genetic chains to achieve a new species of Habsburgian human. After all, it's the season of family, but our family tree is more like a family wreath. Our congenital community has long since clamored for a second chapter of keeping it in the family, and without further ado, it's time to journey to our Gwij and introduce Count Werner, the first and only Habsburg in the 1044 starting date. Werner starts his campaign as a humble 41-year-old husband with 2 kids, 1 sister sibling, and a non-related wife. His life up to this point had been humble, but he soon sought answers in the divine and embarked on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land of Jerusalem. But when Werner left his castle gates, he was exposed to a pantsless priestess, and he knew then that the teachings of Adam were for him. This new faith allowed holy unions, and on his way out of Switzerland, he sent for a messenger owl to our Gwij and bade his wife to marry his son and daughter in the way God intended. This Adamite arrangement secured Otto and Ida together, and much like Adam and Eve, these brother-sister spouses soon followed the message of their father. His unrelated wife Regalind was also converted, though their relations were too exogenous, and soon Werner sought to seduce his neighboring sister, who promptly put him in the brother's own. The capricious count returned from the Holy Land, an enlightened man with a need to expand his land, and soon Bern would feel the burn. But before war could be waged, Werner found himself in massive debt, and to make matters worse, the Holy Roman Emperor Heinrich IV ordered him to convert to Catholic heresy. Naturally, the Adamite autarch refused, which resulted in arrest and imprisonment, but Werner was not down for the count, and was soon able to escape prison after a guard forgot to lock his door. With any luck, the Emperor will wear no clothes, but for now, he was none the wiser, but he did demand that our Count send his son Otto to the imperial capital to be educated in papist prattle. This blasphemy and madness will not pass, and in breaking with tradition, Werner decided to create concubines of his counselors, as he lacked other sister suitors or compatible cousins. The fire of our newfound nudist faith arose in our Gwij, and was the first of many provinces to convert to the true faith. But more conversions required more counties, and soon war was declared and Bern lay bare. In only 47 days, Werner's brother-in-law Ulrich was captured, and the Swiss land now lay in Habsburg hand. Back in the bedroom, the counselor's concubines soon bore Werner scaly and wheezing children, and they weren't even related yet. Rudolf and Maria would soon follow the family tradition, but with losses incurred and a white peace with Upper Lorraine, Werner took out his frustration on his 2-year-old creation. In the following years, claims led to an open bar, and Heinrich's heresy was ignored for a second time. Barring this inconvenience, the county came under cousin control, and despite populist pretenders, was retaken in the space of 7 months. But away from the battlefield, our daughter Ida had come of age, and soon it was time to marry son and daughter, with brother and sister, as is tradition. To commemorate this consanguineous celebration, Werner forged the Duchy of Transjorania in 1080 AD, and soon the drums of war would thunder yet again. House Habsburg lusted for Lorraine, and after occupying their capital and seizing Salzburg, Duke Dietrich was captured, and the lands of Lothar lay liquidated. Transjorania tripled in size, all vassals were returned to Monkey, and their lands and clothes were stripped in succession. At long last, the Habsburg holdings were a contiguous country, but change would soon sweep the Swiss state. In practical matters, our Alpine area made Adamitism a cold choice, and in 1086, Werner decided to put on some clothes and convert his court to Massalianism and avoid the deity of demonetization. In the space of 2 years, Rudolf and Maria, his second daughter-son spousal combination, were married together in the way God intended. Ida and Otto had their first nephew-niece children, and Werner's other brother's sister's spouse procured him a genetically congenital granddaughter by the name of Stefania. But our liege had seen enough and requested us to once again convert to Catholicism, which was declined, as was the demand of our cousin Count Otto to take Lorraine for his lineage. Despite the defense of his domain, the withering Werner passed into heaven 3 months later, relinquishing his reign to Duke Otto, his firstborn son and 29-year-old heir. In 1089, Otto had inherited a divided realm, with his sister-wife and sister-in-law Ida inheriting Upper Lorraine. In order to unite House Habsburg, the star-crossed sibling spouses sired Stefania, a barren daughter and simultaneous niece of Otto. But another Otto, a nudist Adamite, had other ideas and launched a war to lower our crown authority. Otto was never one to say no to his sister-wife, or her bounteous loins, and soon he was in yet another war, forcing his holdings into a 4-way fray. Over the space of 3 years, Otto's wars were over. The nudists were imprisoned and stripped of their lands, and our sister-wife's war was completed upon the capture of her nudist stepsister Heinriche. Our celebration naturally led to procreation, and soon our sister-wife was pregnant with sibling seed. Indeed, our breed and deed thus lead to the twin sons and nephews christened Hugo and Demetrius. Hugo was a spindly giant, while Demetrius was a scaly scalawag, and speaking of scaly, Otto scaled the ramparts of his half-brother's wife, forcing his brother from another mother to raise his step-sibling spawn as his own son. The climbing quantity of dozens of cousins necessitated a new capital, and in 1094, Otto proclaimed Strasbourg to be the seat of sovereign authority. On the field of battle, Bresegau was beaten back, and after victory, our lands and our children had become united. Our daughter and heir Stefania was thus wed to our son and her brother Hugo. Naturally, this unification led to territorial integration, and soon Songdao surrendered, and 1 year later, Otto had landed in Luxembourg. The formation of an Alsatian nation preceded Otto's ascension as cultural head of the Swabians, but back at home, our sons and nephews Demetrius and Hugo had come of age, and thus our mission was to engage in familial tradition. Hugo was wed to our daughter-niece and heir Stefania, while further afield, our levies had broken the county of Bouillon and granted the land to our newborn nephew. Otto was now grandfather of Brunhilde, an inbred giantess born to his daughter-niece and son-nephew. Historians are still in debate as to what she was in relation to her liege, but you can let me know in the comment section below. It was time to bully Burgundy, say 9 to Kaiser conversion, and make our country contiguous by taking Upper Burgundy and granting it to our inbred nieces and nephews. And speaking of nephews, our teenage niece Constance is looking for love from above. Otto was now in the market for a substitute spouse, as his sister-wife Ida was growing older and was found torturing servant girls in the dungeon yet again. The lustful liege's heart hungered for his niece's nuptials, and it was time to make peace and find release. Ida was thus poisoned at the dinner table, and nobody batted an eye when Otto married his niece lover the afternoon afterwards. Love had finally prevailed in the way God had intended, but what wasn't intended was when a non-related woman tried to seduce our sovereign. Talk about disgusting. To make matters worse, Kaiser Ordulf tried to revoke our title again, from which we say nein and decline, and it's now wartime. But love burned too hot, and our new niece-wife took a blow on the field of battle, severely maiming the maiden. The one-eyed, one-legged, and scarred spouse died of her wounds, and nothing would ever be the same. Otto took to the bottle and married yet another niece, this time named Benedicta, and on the battlefield of Bastogne, the Kaiser was captured, peace was signed, and the Kaiser was deposed and stripped of his titles. In celebration, our son was married to our granddaughter, our autarch accumulated mass, and the new Kaiser had to be killed. But death came knocking only for Otto, and he died from drinking himself to death in 1125 at the age of 45. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and Stefania the Short inherited portions of her parents' polity, with her scaly brother-cousin Demetrius inheriting the lands of Burgundy, and her spindly giant brother-husband-cousin Duke inheriting the territory of Transjordania. Decades of keeping it in the family has resulted in our heir and daughter niece Magdalena being incapable of giving birth, and we'll have to use creative cousin cuckoldry in order to continue our campaign. But first, we'll need to take back our lands from the HRE, and with the help of her beloved brother-husband Hugo, Stefania soon sired a spindly newborn nephew who was named Glurgle, as he was too inbred to form words. Love is a battlefield, but on the actual battlefield, our breach into Besançon bore us Burgundy. Our brother-husband Hugo sought to depose Kaiser Ordulf, and Burgundy beat back our brother-lover from Bresse in 1130. As for the Kaiser Reich, it was set alight with the deposition of Ordulf, and the new Kaiser was none the wiser. To commemorate this victory, our brother-husband-cousin sent his sister sovereign his small clothes, and stripped away Transjordania 2 years later. With our liege's lands in hand, Stefania crowned herself queen and renamed the realm in honor of her catatonically congenital son, Glurgle. Her inbred spindly nephew-son was then betrothed to Hema, her half-sister, cousin, and sister-in-law, while the realm was reorganized and reappropriated to the inbred nephews of House Habsburg. In matters of secession, the future generations of our nation are looking unlikely, and the marriage of our niece-daughter Magdalena with our nephew Otto were as barren of prospects as the search for Mancrick's wife. But our swords of a different sort heralded victory after victory, and soon our former liege was lost in Limburg, the kingdom of Bayern bent the knee to Glurglia, and Bavaria came under rule by the cousin-on-cousin counts who now reigned in the realm. The city of Strasbourg, long our sovereign seat of power, became Glurgelburg, and by 1137, Savoy was subjugated under sister-son sovereignty. But on the topic of brother-husbands, Hugo had passed away, and soon Stefania's nephew-vassal Otto approached, though he was yet married to our daughter-niece Magdalena. Stefania succeeded in enforcing this divorce, but her attempts at marrying her nephew-lover had failed on account of her barren loins. Their love would have to languish in secret, as society was not yet ready, and it took a further 4 years for Franconia to fall into the fold. 1149 marked the procurement of Piedmont, but it also marked a turning point in our tyrant's talents. Stefania was inbred and infirm, and shored up the autumn of her years by executing her rebellious daughter Magdalena, and disinheriting Gottfried, resulting in Glurgle being destined to rule Glurglia. But her disinherited Duke descendant wanted to be a lover to his infirm queen mother, and despite taking Tuscany, Stefania slithered into oblivion at the age of 65. With saliva seeping from his mouth, the 26-year-old Glurgle could now lead his nation into salvation. This inbred and cycloptic spindly sovereign possessed surprisingly average skills for a homunculus of House Habsburg, but his health was complicated by his participation in the warlike situation. Glurgle suffered severe wounds, and in spite of the thoughts and prayers of his other aunt-wife, the progressively purebred court lacked the competence to cure their crown head, and desperately sought out medieval health care. Alas, our proto-Austrian autarch was not insured, and died before help could arrive, leaving behind a disappointing reputation as the shortest-serving sovereign of his kingdom's history, with a meager 4 months of rightful rule. Glurglia will have to survive without Glurgle, but it won't be easy, as his firstborn son and concurrent first cousin, Jurgen, inherits the throne as an inbred infant in a kingdom at war. But before we continue, the YouTube algorithm has informed me that you have a 3 in 4 chance of not being subscribed. You should consider joining our Habsburg family by liking this video and seducing the subscription box. With that out of the way, it's time for us to focus on our upcoming child soldier sovereign, King Jurgen I. Jurgen the Young takes the throne as a 5-year-old inbred infant, betrothed to his equally inbreded dwarven cousin Gertrude. His kingdom was in constant conflict, and between smashing separatists in Switzerland and routing rebels of the realm, his childhood campaigns left little time for fun or games. In terms of family, the entire cousin-controlled court is by now hopelessly inbred, like Romilda, the cannibal countess. Of course, neighboring courts tried to take advantage of the troubled toddler, but soon met their makers on the field of battle. The teenaged tyrant soon came of age, though his substandard statistics and substatured spouse might make things difficult. But Jurgen was a wise man, though he wasn't always thinking with the right head. And speaking of heads, the head of the Catholic heresy called for a crusade on Lotharingia not 1 year later. Outnumbered more than 4 to 1 before the battles begun, Jurgen ceded the one-county kingdom to the Pope in an effort to avoid further bloodshed. But that was not the only liquid that was shed, as cousins across the country waited in line to wine and dine our liege, and for his own part, Jurgen spread his sibling seed across the 7 seas, siring bastard after bastard across the bountiful baronies. By age 18, Jurgen was already in love with 4 family members, though the pressure was taking a toll. But outside of the bedroom, Burgundy became Glurglian, Luxembourg was reconquered, and the vertically challenged Gertrude was divorced and replaced with his cousin and 5th lover Adelind, who was herself murdered by one of the other 6 lovers of the seductful sovereign. Cousin Countess Clara was thus married as Jurgen's 3rd bride, though his former dwarven lover was open wide to provide further roll tide. Somehow, our sovereign was able to wage war at home and abroad, and soon Switzerland was ceded, genetics were unimpeded, offspring were seeded, bastards were needed, Franconia was conceded, daughters were greeted, 13 children were seeded, and a younger wife was soon needed. But the proliferating progeny of our protagonist needed plentiful pastures, and soon the Habsburg boys descended upon Bavaria. The HRE bent the knee after the crown capital was conquered, but our wife became suspicious of any potential mistress. Jurgen's 5 other lineage-linked lovers would have to stay a secret, but thankfully, the Habsburgs now owned Bavaria, and were thus able to cede their counties to the countyless cousins in need. But in order to succeed, Jurgen had to weed out his bastard boy from succession, and he proceeded to torture him until he passed into Habsburg heaven. Glarglia II was thus next in line for succession, and Jurgen had her married to her brother Glargel, as is family tradition. And speaking of traditions, Jurgen set out to seduce his princess progeny, and despite amorous advances, his daughter soon placed him in the father's own. Depressed and stressed, our autarch advanced into Austria, and soon held the historic lands of the Habsburgs. Jurgen was now a living legend, but his status did little to protect him from a second crusade that outnumbered his forces by more than 3 to 1. The lands of Lothar were thus lost yet again to the Papist pretenders, and our Habsburg hero realized that the Italians would have to be erased in order to save face. Treviso was taken, Bologna was broken, Romagna was reappropriated, and our ruler died to complications related to inbreeding. Jurgen will forever be remembered as the man with countless cousin lovers, and his reign had more than doubled the size of both his dynasty and the Glurglian Empire. In 1202 AD, he leaves his holdings in the hands of his obese and inbred daughter, Queen Glarglia of Glurglia. The brother king and sister queen inherited a divided realm that was split between the independent crowns of Glurglia, Bavaria, and Italy. Though all were controlled by House Habsburg, Glarglia hungered for the holdings of her newborn niece Dorothy, and, over 20 months of conflict, succeeded in taking the kingdom from kindergarten. Glarglia III, however, still held Bavaria, and thus Glarglia II had her forces sent to bear down on her simultaneous sister and sister-in-law. Sibling rivalry rarely results in the deaths of tens of thousands of men, but when it does, you can be sure that your 17th sister, Glargol Glurga, will join in for a quick win. Despite these setbacks, Glarglia II beat back Bayern, signed a white peace with the leper interloper, and crushed Roman rebels from the mortal plane, though her brother husband Glargol paid the ultimate price with his life. To the southwest, Burgundy's breakdown formed the foundation of a new empire, and soon Glarglia II proclaimed herself Empress of Glurglia. The realm was at last reforged, and as the first Kaiserine, Glarglia had her forces bring pain against France and conquered Champagne. Her feuding family had other ideas, but they too were sliced and diced, much like Luxembourg, which, for the 4th time, had changed hands again after the last Christian crusade. Reigning with absolute authority, Glarglia founded the first holy order of her familial faith, and granted the city of Habsburg Berg to the Knights of the Congenital Chalice. In matters of faith, the Empress sought to punish the Papist Pope and avenge her late father, and in 1226 launched a war to destroy the crown of Catholicism. But as for Glargol herself, she soon wore the crown of a different renown. Rome itself now stood before the power of our polygamous progeny, and in a desperate plea of defense, the Pope cowardly called for yet another crusade against our rightful realm. But God had other plans, and the crusade not only failed to recruit the Christian realm, but also resulted in the requisition of Rome for the Qin dynasty. The once sacred Catholic state was thus renamed after our family's faith, and after carving up Italy, the gargantuan Glarglia was the second Habsburg to die suddenly and unexpectedly from partaking in her family's traditions. In 1235 AD, the realm thus passed to her daughter and simultaneous niece, the severely inbred Adelinde of Argot. Adelinde ascended to the throne at age 39 and shared the congenital character of her late mother and simultaneous aunt. Her marriage to her cousin husband Adolf is slightly concerning, and we'll have to hope that he isn't into painting. In keeping with our Habsburg traditions, the new empress married off her children, Glarglia III and Glurgol, together in the ritual of their relatives. In addition, Adelinde decided to take her best friend, brother-in-law, and cousin Siegfried out of the friend zone and into the cousin corner. But before our mouth-breathing monarch could make a move, she died from complications due to inbreeding and became the shortest reigning Habsburg after ruling for only 24 days. She's the third consecutive sovereign to die from inbreeding, and leaves the throne to the confusingly christened Glarglia II, the Third, an 11-year-old hunchback who has somehow evaded the Habsburg Qin.
In 1235, the realm had fallen into the tween-age hands of Glorglia II the Third, an inbred hunchback betrothed to her brother-husband Glurgle. But her ancestor Adolf was now single and ready to mingle, so she decided to celebrate Father's Day by procuring her pa's hand in marriage. So inbred was the House of Habsburg that the English language was breaking down, and soon rebels rose from within. Vultures of House Habsburg sought to overthrow Glorglia the Girl and replace her with her cousin Countess Glargel Glurga, and with forces outnumbering her 5-1, she was forced to accept. With the loss of Glurgelberg and Glargelhof, Glorglia II the Third held barely 3 baronies and was banished into exile into Switzerland, where she acquired a taste for human horn. When Anna sent yet another raven, this time demanding the empire of Glurglia for the inbred princess Serhilda of Italy, Glorglia was in no position to refuse. Her hunger for her lost holdings ultimately resulted in fried family members, and soon Cathara la Glargel was converted into boiled bratwurst. With a well-balanced diet of consumed cousins, she came of age in 1239, rendering her Princess Glorglia II the Third, a Midas-touched maiden who now broke bread with her father-husband Adolf. With her hands now on the ancestral capital of Glurgelberg, it was time for her to lay claim to the empire that was her birthright. As for Glurglia, it was ruled by Glorglia II the Third's aunt sister-in-law Serhilda, an inbred, one-footed deviant. Surrounded by papist heresy, Glurglia is a mecca for the Massalian religion and espouses a family-first doctrine that has led to stability for the Swabian culture. Glorglia II the Third is the 9th direct offspring of Werner of Aargau, and at 16 years old, this ill and lustful hunchback hero has already eaten 4 human hors d'oeuvres, and now hungers for the home that is her birthright. House Habsburg is hopelessly inbred, and consists of 256 living members and 10 cadet houses, though none have yet achieved a perfect circle on account of cousins cucking outside of the family tree. As a Habsburg, you have a 9 in 10 chance of being either inbred, a hunchback, spindly, or a combination of all 3. Going back along the family tree, we've started as Count Werner, proceeded as Duke Otto, and my computer literally can't handle the computations needed to render the rest of this worrisome family wreath. Ultimately, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of cousins blessed with their sibling seed, and, like a mold, House Habsburg is posed to continue their growth until the heat death of the universe. Before ending the video, I'd like to thank you for watching this far and supporting the YouTube algorithm. If you like Crusader Kings and want more strategy gaming content, I humbly request that you usurp the like button and claim the subscription box. On this channel, you can find a variety of other mockumentaries, like that time we broke bread in Brittany or when we abolished the Australian government in favor of free market capitalism. I hope your new year is off to a great start, and I apologize for the late release of this video, as I have just recovered from the virus that cannot be named. If you want to support ya boy, you can also consider donating to our Patreon, or donating basic attention tokens through the Brave browser. Without further ado, it's time now to roll the credits.